And now I introduce the presenters. Françoise Tourniaire is the author of The Art of Support and distinguished industry consultant, blogger, and speaker. Make sure you check out her work at ftworks.com. And Krishna Raj Raja is the founder and CEO of SupportLogic, the intelligent support platform company based in the Silicon Valley. To learn more, check out SupportLogic website. Without further ado, I will ask Krishna to take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Amit. So today's topic is customer support in tough times, doing more with less. So while we were brainstorming topics for the month of May, we wanted to do something to the support community and help them in this transitionary phase that all of us are going through. So one of the challenges that support always has faced is they've been asked to do more with less. So this is not something completely new for support, but now we are entering a phase like a lot of companies are really rethinking their hiring plans, rethinking their budget spend. So doing more with less is something top of mind for a lot of folks. So when we were brainstorming this topic, we decided to go with this topic. We felt this would be useful for a lot of support leaders who are trying to strategize their operating plan for the next 1 year. And so that's why we chose this topic. One thing reminded me when we were looking at this topic is support organization is very well known for doing more with less, and it's kind of expected, but also the other entity in our ecosystem, which is known for doing more with less, is startups. So being a startup, SupportLogic being a startup, we have used to the idea of doing more with less, and interestingly, you can tend to become more creative when there are constraints. Constraints always fosters creativity. And constraint also helps you to focus and prioritize things that are most important to you. So often constraints and resource constraints that you have, I see them as a blessing in disguise. I don't necessarily see them as something that can cripple you, but often it helps you to understand what is your true north, what is your true priority, and how do you double down on key investments that you need to make yourself successful. That thinking is often a recipe for success. This is why the whole startup ecosystem exists. And this is why a lot of startups can do a lot more than what a big company can do. So with that thought, I will hand it over to FT. FT, please take it away.
Thanks, Krishna. Appreciate it. So last week we talked about retaining customers in tough times. And I hope that some of you at least attended the discussion, and what we talked about then was more keep our top line working well, right? And now we're going to look a little more at expenses and what we can do in that area. So the first thing I want to say, things that you should not do. There are some things that are just not going to work. I've highlighted here 3 of them. One is an across the board cut. The second one is doing layoffs based on seniorities. And the third one is long-term salary cuts. And I will explain each and every one of them. And as I was thinking about these strategies and why they don't work, I was thinking about my father. My father recently moved from a 3-bedroom apartment to a essentially 1-bedroom, some people might call it a studio, but 1 bedroom in a retirement community. So he had to downsize, right? And fortunately, he did not cut across the board and say, okay, I'm going to a place that's about, less than half the size of what I have. I'm going to cut my couch in 2 and keep half of my couch. And I'm going to look at all those dishes that I have, and I'm going to keep half of the dishes, and I'm going to keep half of my books, and I'm going to keep half of whatever, right? He instead, prodded a little bit by his children, he instead decided to rethink his life. And that's kind of what we want to do for ourselves, right? So he said, you know, I'm going to be in this small place. I am not going to throw the big parties that your mother and I used to throw. It's not going to happen, right? First of all, my mother's no longer there, right? So we do not need any of the dishes. It's not, we need to keep half the dishes. We don't need any, because we are not going to have 13 or 14 or 16 people around the table. It's not going to happen anymore. But I love my books. I'm going to keep a lot of the books, right? And my couch is too big, but I am going to instead invest in a super duper armchair, because I'm going to spend a lot of my time there now that I'm getting older. So that's why I'm thinking about my dad, right? You can't just do a blunt cut across. If you do that to your team, then you're going to come out with very strange things. Because basically when you cut across, you are pretending that things are going on as usual, right? Just a little bit smaller. And that's not what usually is happening. And in particular, if you have small initiatives and then you cut off of them, maybe they will crumble entirely, and that's not what you want. And you may want to invest in completely new things that don't even exist today, right? But will help you weather the storm. And we'll talk about that later in the discussion today. So a blunt cut is not what you want. You want a scalpel, right? And you want to choose what it is that you are going to be focusing on. You need to define your new priorities. So just like my father needed to define his new life, right? We need to define our new priority in our new life. Second, ineffective strategy is to make all the decisions based on seniority. So if I apply this to my dad, it's going to be really ridiculous. He's not going to say, well, you know, this table is the second thing your mother and I bought together, so I'm going to keep it because it's the oldest thing. Well, guess what? The table does not fit, right? It is not necessarily the best way to go. Lovely table, by the way, but just not going to work for him, right? Whereas something that he invented or purchased more recently is going to serve him a little bit better. So same thing here. You want to hang on to the people that are most critical to your business, and they may or may not be the more senior people. And then let's talk a little bit about long-term salary cuts. So I am talking here about long-term. Short-term cuts can be very, very good. I'll give you actually an example of a client of mine who, you know, they're faced with kind of lower volumes right now because everybody's working from home and their customers are not contacting them as much as they used to. And they did something that I thought was very simple and very effective, which is they asked everybody to take vacation, right? So vacation dollars have already been accrued, right? And they just said to people, just take a week off. And we promise it's vacation. We won't bug you during this time. Of course, you can't really go anywhere, but you will be really on vacation. Maybe you can homeschool your kids or whatever you have to do, right? And we will share the burden that way. Now that is effective because it's short term, right? Plus, I mean, financially, there was really no consequence for people, right? But it was short term, it was fine. But if you do a long-term salary cut, then what's going to happen is that those people you most want to hang on to, your stars, right, are going to say, oh, well, maybe I could go over there and make the salary I used to make, right? So it is a little bit dangerous to do that. So these three things I think are dangerous, and we're obviously going to focus on things that are meaningful. But before we do this, I would like to ask you what kind of budget constraints you're under. So Omid is going to put up a poll for us on this. And we are curious to know what kind of budget guidance you have received. Is it a matter of a special number that you have to hit, you know, been asked for specific cuts? That would be the first option. Second, it might be that you are in a hiring freeze and a spending freeze, but no real cut, right? You might be on the same budget as before. Tell us if that's the case, or perhaps you're growing faster than planned. I have some clients in that mode, and if you're there, please tell us. So if you could just click the button that corresponds to your particular situation, that would be great.
And this is a single choice question, so.
Yeah, single choice question. Pick the one that fits the best.
Okay, 10 more seconds. I'm going to end the poll.
And amongst my clients, I have seen all four. It depends a little bit the industry that they're in. I was talking this morning to somebody who services pharmacies, and they are certainly in the last bucket. They're growing. They are very, very busy.
Yeah, it is surprising to see how industries that sometimes you didn't even think has a tailwind opportunity are suddenly growing really fast. Some are obvious, some ones are really not obvious. And
yeah, I mean, pharmacy
it,
systems, that's obvious, right? But I have another client who's in the security business, and it's totally booming because people are working from home and they want, companies want to protect their assets, right?
Yeah, that is somewhat less obvious. You wouldn't think security would be top priority. But then if you think about it, it makes sense.
Exactly. It's been really hard for me to work with them because they just don't have time for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, at this point, I would like to share the results.
Okay, so we are more on the cut side. I guess my pharmacy clients are too busy and my security clients are too busy to be on the call, right? Let's really focus on reprioritization then. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about rethinking processes. So just like my dad had to rethink how he was going to live, right, in that smaller place, we have to rethink how we are going to do support. We're going to talk about people because a big part of support budgets is composed of people. So we have to really think about how do we make do with what we have if you're on a freeze situation, right? Or how do we handle the cuts that we think will be coming because of the current situation? And then I want to talk about investing, even for all of you who seem to be in cutting-like situations. We really want to think about areas where you want to put more effort in and not less effort in as part of this rethinking. So let's start by thinking about processes. And the first thing I would like to say is something I said last month in the other workshops that we had, which is that making changes is easier in tough times. So if you are in a situation where you're being asked to freeze or cut, it's going to be easier to make changes to processes. People are going to be a lot more open to that. So even initiatives that maybe you tried before, but it just didn't work very well, might be worth trying again right now. I'll give examples in a minute, but think of things like, well, we never had time to do KCS, but now we're going to make time because we have to. Or we never thought that we wanted to do online discussion forums, but now we have to because we just will have fewer people on the phones, right? So those are the examples of changes that could become actually easier in this time. I've organized them in two buckets. The first bucket is about self-service, and then you can imagine that the second bucket is going to be about assistant support when we actually work with customers. So self-service is absolutely a way to do more with less. We've been saying that for years. It may be the case for you that some of these initiatives have been a little bit neglected, and so it's a good time to start them again. So what might they be? Well, one is to improve your customer portal. FDWorks actually does quite a lot of work in that area. I have a design team working for me. And by the time we get called, often what we see is a portal that's fairly weak. And therefore, customers just don't want to use it, right? Or when they use it, they really don't appreciate the experience. So this may be the time for you to think about, okay, what can we do for customers that we know is going to be incredibly productive, incredibly effective, and we just didn't do so much of it before. Right? So improving the portal, reviving knowledge management, right? We should be doing knowledge management every day, and not just because we are in a downturn, but knowledge management is a way to, first of all, do self-service for customers, right? And secondly, it also helps internally to make us much more efficient. So how can we do this better? Is it a good time to embrace KCS, knowledge-centered support? Is it a good time to look at who is participating and who is not? Wonderful opportunity to do something around knowledge management. And then forums, I was just talking about them before. So forums is a way to do one-to-many support. I sometimes call it doing support on stage, right? So I am helping this one customer who has this one question, but because other people are watching me do this, right, I might help many, many more customers. And of course, we would like peer-to-peer support. That's great too. But even if you are doing the bulk of the work, it's still a wonderful way to leverage your support efforts. So think about these things. It may be, again, that you had a lot of resistance against a lot of these projects, and now is a good time to see that you have less resistance and you can really push these projects along. So that's self-service. The next bucket is assisted support. So assisted support is support by phone, by web, by chat, etc., where you actually have a person helping the customers. So what can you do there? Well, first you could do is to encourage customers to use online case logging, whether it's via chat or via the web. I have many clients these days where 95% of issues literally are coming in via the web. It's a wonderful way to speed things up. It's a wonderful way to smooth out the demand curve, right? So all of that make it, you know, much, much better than the phone. So if you're still heavy phones, this is a time to look into that. Second thing, which is really free, isn't that a good word when we're trying to do more with less, is to remove administrative layers. So when I go talk to clients, I almost always find that there are all kinds of approvals everywhere in the support cycle. So for example, I'm a support engineer. I find what I think is a suspected bug. Do I just send the bug to engineering? Oh no, oh no. You may not even touch sometimes Jira or whatever system that engineering is using. You will probably have to have a team lead or a manager or several people approve the bug before it goes into engineering. Now, it might be a good idea if I'm new and I don't know what I'm doing. You don't want to deluge engineering with stupid requests, right? But if I'm an experienced support engineer, that's just a waste of manpower. And we can go to a more licensing model, very much like KCS, where we say, you know, FT and Omid and Jane over there are okay to go, right? They don't need an administrative layer of approval. But, you know, Jose and Mark over there, they're new, right? So we really need to have them have that administrative layer. So think about it. Anytime you have an approval layer in there, it's a good target for streamlining. And again, these are different times, so people will be more open to that. So think about that. Now, if you want to go more ambitious, you could start removing tiers. So support organization traditionally have been tiered, where there's level 1, and then if level 1 can't do it, then we go to level 2, and then we go to level 3, and in some pathological cases, we have level 4, and that's too many, right? So the illustration on the right-hand side here shows you a better way to do it, which is to have one case owner that talks to the customer from A to Z, right? And then that case owner collaborates with other team members and gets help as needed and delivers all the support to the customer. So this would be swarming or touch and hold, depending on the variation that you are using. But the idea here is we do not move issues along to different people. Certainly we do not move the customer along to different people. We just create just-in-time collaboration when needs be. So that brings us to the last bullet, which is to improve collaboration. This will save a lot of time to not do this heavy tiering that we are doing. So take a look. You are a good candidate to remove tiers if most of your questions are actually complex and there's very few FAQ type stuff in there. If you have mostly easy questions where the answer is already known and only a few difficult questions, then yes, tiers is fine. But for most people, tiers are not necessary. So
yeah, if I may add a comment here, the tiered support model, and at the outset, it looks like a way of reducing cost because you're doing L1, L2, L3, so you can have different levels and you're not using your most expensive resource, L3, more often. But from a customer experience point of view, it's not really the best customer experience because customers feel like they're punted through different levels. So having a single owner makes a lot of sense. But also I would argue that having multiple layers and having this communication barriers between these different layers and processing different layers overall makes your whole support organization largely inefficient. Even though some people may start this as a way to make their process more efficient, it can drive them towards inefficiency, and it doesn't fit with the do more with less model in my mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. People often think of the removing tiers idea as being for customer satisfaction, which it is. Customers really like not having tiers. But it is also a way to remove inefficiencies. There's a lot of redos when you have a tiered model where you start over, right? And so every time you start over at another tier, you yourself, and the customer has to do extra. Okay, fine, that's a problem, right? But inside the organization, we have to start over as well. So it's actually not very efficient. The other thing is, in every tiered organization that I know, there are delays. And when you have delays, you have an unhappy customer at the other end, and an unhappy customer takes more resources, right? Because you have to smooth out the stuff first before you can get to the technical. So yes, it's very inefficient to have tiers, very inefficient.
Yeah, you'll probably end up spending more time on the escalations, and other form of time inefficiencies might creep in that you may not even realize.
Exactly. So what we're doing by doing tier, again, in the wrong environment where we have a lot of complex questions, right? What we lose by using tiers is that, first of all, the level 2 people have got to start over pretty much, right? And secondly, they start over with an angry client. Not good, not good at all. All right, so this was about rethinking processes. Let's think about people. So people are very important in support. Support budgets typically are 85% people compensation related things. So obviously we're going to have to look at that quite a lot. So the first thing I would say is to look at your hierarchy and to look at flattening the organization. So I know that most of you on the phone probably have a title of VP or directors, and you're very important and you're adding a lot of value, right? But sometimes I see teams that are so tiny that I kind of wonder about the wisdom of doing this. Before this discussion this morning, I talked to a client who has a lot of team leads in their organization. And I talked to a wonderful team lead, very helpful, and explained to me how things are working, etc. And this particular team lead has 5 people in his team. Now, I'm sure he gives them a lot of TLC, right? Because 5 is a very small number. And I see that he's working very hard and trying to add value to the organization, etc. But in my head, during this entire time, I was thinking, why 5? Why not 10, right? Now, notice that I didn't say why not 20 or 25 or 30, right? Because I think at that point, you lose out a lot, right? I mean, this particular team lead was doing QA with each of his people, you know, the value that he was giving to them. But think about that. If you have small teams, it's probably your time to merge them. For me, the only reason to have a really small team is when you're expanding, right? So that you don't have maxed out managers at all times, and you have managers that are small teams that can be expanded. You're probably not going to expand right now, so you can probably think about merging small teams. So think about that first. Second idea is to look at non-delivery functions. So this is a little bit more tricky. First of all, I need to define what's a delivery function and what's a non-delivery function. And second, I need to explain what to do here. So a delivery function is very simply a function whose job it is to deliver support to the customer. So if you have support engineers, if you have managers that manage these people, they are all doing delivery, direct delivery to the customer. Now, delivery is obviously everything else. So it would be things like training, administering the tools, doing quality management, doing new release planning. All of these things are non-delivery. Okay? So non-delivery functions are very useful. I very often talk to clients who do not have non-delivery or ops function, they have a hard time, right? Because in particular, they can't plan for new releases very well. New releases arrive, right? And then bad stuff happens, not good. So there is a great value in non-delivery function. What I'm looking for here is areas where perhaps it's not working so well. I'll give you one example. Let's say you have quality assurance function, right? And its role is to review cases and to produce reports, right? Explaining what went well and did not go well in all these cases, right? And these reports, for whatever reason, are not read by anybody. I would say that this is not value add, right? There's no value for the customer in doing this, right? And therefore, maybe we don't need it at all, right? Or we need to shrink it down, right? Most of the time, it's going to be a shrink down idea where, well, perhaps some of the stuff can be done by the support engineers, giving them some more variety in their tasks, right? And we only keep a coordination function there. So again, I am not saying get rid of non-delivery functions. I'm just saying, look at what they're producing. Is there a value in there from a customer's perspective, even though the customer won't see it immediately, right? But they will generate the value down the line. Okay, third idea is to take care of your stars. So this is a little bit tricky, but I'm sure it will make sense in a second. So the idea here is there are people on your team who are wonderful contributors and are your stars. And you probably can tell me who they are without even thinking about anything, right? Because they are the people who you know are kind of carrying the load the most, right? So these people are at risk right now. Why are they at risk? They're at risk because they're the most marketable in your team, right? So they are the ones who might say, I think that the climate is not too good here. I'm going to go see somewhere else, right? And they will get a job if they do that. So you don't want them to do that. You want to hang on to these people. So you need to identify them. You will identify them through some kind of rank and rate exercise, right? And you want to shower them with love, by the way. You don't need to shower them with money necessarily, right? But just tell them that they are valued, that you care about them, that you thank them on a regular basis, and you need to do that for everybody. So whether it's a manager or an individual contributor, they should know that you value them personally for what they do. That was the second set of the discussion about people. Now let's go to the third one, which is around investing. So this might be counter-intuitive, right? Because if we're trying to cut, how could we invest, right? So let's think of my father again, right? My father moving into his smaller apartment may need to invest in certain things, right? So for example, he will need to invest in a small dining table because the big one doesn't work anymore, but he still needs to eat. His French, right? He has to eat, very important, right? So he may need to make an investment, or he may need to make an investment in a new armchair because he's going to be watching more TV than he's getting older, reading more books, right? So those are examples of investment. So for us, obviously, it's not tables or chairs, but it might be around tools in particular. So here is the first discussion here, which is to simplify your tool stack. When I talk to a client, one of the things that I do is I make an inventory of all the tools that they use. And often I am shocked at the number of tools, and especially overlapping tools. So I was on a call this morning with a customer, different customer from the team lead I was telling you about. And I asked about their tool stack. And there was a long silence, and I knew what was coming. And then the guy said, well, in terms of collaboration tools, I think we have maybe 5, maybe 6. And I said, what? That seemed a bit too much, 5 or 6. So I was poised with my little stylus and I'm like, okay, I'm taking notes now. And he said, well, if we're talking for the European support team, we use this. And for the North American support team, and Latin America does something else. And of course, Japan does something else. But if we want to talk to sales, then we use that. I'm thinking, what? This is insane. Now, this poor man may not be able to control what sales is using or what engineering is using, or any of these things. But I would think that it's maybe possible for the Europeans and the North Americans and the South Americans to actually use the same collaboration system within support, right? There's hope. By the way, that's the project I'm working on. So I mean, I knew it would be particularly bad. So if you are in that situation where you have multiple systems doing the same thing, right, now is probably the time to simplify. And again, it's a good time to make changes now because people see that there is a need to simplify and to be more efficient. Now, I am not saying here that you should pick one tool to do everything, not what I'm saying, right? But you should not have 5 or 6, I like the or 6 different collaboration tools. You should not have a different bug tracking system for each product line. Again, not your responsibility necessarily, right? You should just have one portal for all the acquisitions that you have made, etc. So think about that. Think about that simplification of the tool stack. So this is really a reducing exercise, right? Sometimes you really want to actually invest, right, and go do new things. So I am speaking here on behalf of SupportLogic, so obviously I have to talk about AI, right? But generally speaking, there's a lot of stuff that we can do that will deliver actually a better type of support, right? By being smarter about the way we do things. So idea number 1 is anything around event detection. Let's say, you know, I'm supporting a storage system and my customer is running out of storage. I should do something, right? I should not wait for the disk to fill and then the customer is in trouble and then we have to have an escalation about it, right? I should be able to say, oh, you know, we're getting at 80% here. Let's do something, right? You can certainly start predicting escalations in a better way. SupportLogic can help you with this, right? And you can also prioritize bug fixes and new features. One of the big problems we have in support is we have fantastic data and we are not using it. So if I go to engineering and I say, hey, I want this new feature because it would be a good idea, that's not going to work, right? If I say, hey, we want this new feature because these 15 customers want it and they correspond to $3 million in ARR. And by the way, we have this special customer in that lot that we really want to help. You'll have a better chance. Right? So let's leverage better that the data that we have so that in the end, we are going to do more for our customers. Okay, last idea. So this one is a little out there, literally, but it might be something to think about when you're reprioritizing, which is to think about where you are. And I'm talking about it because, well, it's true that it could be great savings, but it's also because of the work from home experience that we are currently enjoying. It is a good idea to think about, okay, what does that mean for working in different locales? So it could be that you are right now in an expensive location and you want to look at a less expensive location. It could be that you have suddenly become much more open to remote employees, right? So now is the time to rethink how you will hire and retain and train people long-term. And it could look a little bit different from what you're doing right now. That's not going to save you money tomorrow, but if you adopt a new strategy, then it will save you money over the long term without diminishing any of the things we are doing with customers. Okay, so one more thought, and then we'll go to questions. I'm looking forward to that, the questions. So last week we talked about retaining existing customers, and I just want to remind us of a couple of ideas that we discussed, because instead of cutting expenses, it's always better to maintain the top line, right? So idea number 1, maintain a good level of support. This is the time when customers are very literally testing you, right? If you're delivering good support to them, they're much more likely to stay with you. Second idea we discussed last week is around scale down. So some customers will want to decrease the number of licenses they are using from you, or decrease the number of users, or suspend maybe some of the licenses or whatever. Always do a negotiation for that. Don't just agree to go down, but agree for how to step back up at the end, right? And then the last idea was to offer managed services where customers may want to delegate their sysadmin chores to you, and you might be able to do that in a very profitable manner, and that could be a long-term revenue stream. So this is an increased stream, right? So if you're curious about this, you can go to the SupportLogic website and register for the webinar and view it if you want to. So with that, I want to leave some time for questions. Let's open it up. So Omid, I think you will be our MC, right?
All right, yes, I'd be happy to read the questions that came through chat line. One question was, any ideas on how to encourage swarming behavior? Would common metrics among support, engineering, and professional services teams, for example, be a right approach? Any tips you could provide for swarming encouragement?
Well, I think the answer is in the question, as is often the case, right? So swarming, I think one of the reasons why we don't do more swarming is that the metrics are against it. So certainly within the support team, right? We talked about swarming last month, and within the support team, often there are incentives against swarming, right? Because if I'm being selfish and not swarming, and I crank through a lot of cases, that's going to be good for me, right? But instead, if I stop and then I go help Omid or Krishna or whoever, right, with other things, these things do not count in the metrics. So certainly having the right metrics is going to encourage more of a swarming behavior. The bottom line, if we're trying to encourage swarming with engineering or professional services, right, these people typically have zero incentives today to help with support, right? So it's a complete rethink of the process, and how do we capture the fact that somebody helped and somebody was hopeful. So I would say that yes, the metrics will matter a lot. When we talked about collaboration last month, that might be a good thing to go back to for more ideas. And yes, the problem is what's in it for me, right? What's in it for the people who are swarming with you? Are they going to be recognized in some way, shape, or form?
Very good. Next question is interrelationship between flattening the organization as an interesting topic and its relationship to the complexity of the product being supported.
Okay, let me think about this. So to me, it has no connection.
Yeah, same here.
I think the problem that we have in support, so I'm going to step on my soapbox, and Krishna, you can tell me to step back if you don't want me to be on it anymore, right? I think what we believe, a lot of organizations believe for support, is that in order to be a manager of a highly complex support team, you need to be also the product expert in that complex product. And I think that's completely unrealistic for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you are the product expert, then why are you wasting your time managing? Don't want to be rude, right? But right. And if you are a manager and you're doing all of the good strategic things, you will lose your technical edge, right? So I'm not saying that we should have managers that know nothing, of course not, right? But we should not try to have them be both. It's just not practical, and there are better ways to do it. And let's separate the two. And if we separate the two, we can definitely flatten. And let the experts be expert. Let the swarming happen without the managers, right? The experts will be able to collaborate very well. And the managers should be doing things like, you know, making sure that we're working on the right priorities, having the right tool, having the right communication with engineering about new releases, etc. But not necessarily be also the product expert. I'll step down from my soapbox.
Krishna, any comments? In addition?
Yeah. Personally, I don't think there's a very strong correlation between product complexity and the number of levels of support that you need to have. As FT pointed out, what you need to support a product is somebody who understands the product, who has passion for the product and is a product expert. And when you have passion and you have interest, you tend to learn all aspects of the product. Eventually, you become a very well-rounded person. My personal opinion is organizations have adopted L1, L2, L3 strategy primarily from a cost perspective, because L1 engineers tend to be less expensive than L3 and L2. But in the long run, as I pointed out earlier, it may not be the most efficient strategy. So I think complexity has got less to do with it. If you have a highly complex product, you'll end up hiring generally more skilled engineers in general. You don't need to hire less skilled engineers and then keep them as frontline and have more skilled engineers at the back line. You don't need to do that. You can just hire skilled engineers in general. If you adopt a good KCS strategy, and if you have a good self-service model, and if you continuously improve and refine the product on an ongoing basis, you can also deflect a lot of those simple questions that come to you by fixing the problems in the product and improving the usability of the product. And those kind of insights are generally better served by people who are more skilled and who have seen the full spectrum of problems from L1 to L3. They are in a better position to give the good recommendations to engineering. If we just did an L1 team to handle it, all of it by themselves, most of those insights never goes back to the product team. And so you're in this constant firefighting mode. The L1 team will continue to take those simple questions, and those simple issues will never get addressed in the product. That's not a good position. That's not a good long-term strategy for the company.
Very good. The next question is, you're telling us to streamline processes and invest in a core set of tools, but at the same time suggesting we cut down on the operations functions. Don't we need to invest more in ops to be able to drive those initiatives?
You do. And that's why I try to be so careful about streamlining ops, right? So what I'm looking at for operations is activities that maybe were useful one day, right? But are no longer really making a difference. I'm a great fan of ops, and I think that too often people who are focused on delivery kind of forget that, well, maybe there's a better way to do what we're doing, right? And that's what ops should be. Ops should be the conscience of support, right? Are we doing the right things? Not are we doing things efficiently? Delivery people do that, right? But are we doing the right things to begin with? So yeah, there's a contradiction here, and that's why we want to really rethink the whole organization as opposed to cutting across the board. If you have a very small ops function that just does not have the bandwidth to do some of these new tools initiatives, then maybe you need to hire more people there, right? And be a little bit more conservative with delivery. Yeah, that's a great question.
Very good.
Yeah, my take on that. Yeah. Sorry, Amit, just want to inject a comment there on the ops. So ops generally helps you to identify inefficiencies in your support operations, right? You need visibility into what's going on in your support and see which pockets of support operations needs help, where you're not running efficiently. That visibility is very key. But just like any other monitoring system, this is something taught in performance engineering field. I come from performance engineering background. If you do more frequent monitoring, the monitoring process itself can introduce performance issues because you're probing the system more frequently. So the operations also has to be, if you're doing support operations, you're managing a team, you're looking at the efficiency of your team members, frequent interruptions there, and if you're not following an inefficient process, can actually make the engineers less, make them less efficient. And rather, so I think there's a fine balance there. Visibility is key, but also, and this is where I think tools plays a very important role. Tools which directly connects and gives recommendations to the support engineers is actually very crucial as well, so that you don't need a middle management to educate the support engineers what they need to do. So those kind of assistance can be done today with the tools that are available.
Very good insights. Only a couple more questions. One is actually related to the earlier one. I'm supporting a raft of old products that are really costly to support, since we only get a few cases of each. but I have to keep some support engineers trained on them. Is this now a good time to sunset them? I presume sunset the systems, not the support engineers, but.
Oh yeah, we don't sunset people. No, we sunset products only. Okay, so this is a good example of the time today might be ripe to finally sunset the products, right? The reason why they were never sunsetted is that nobody wanted to put the time and effort into doing a sunset. They were, product marketing folks, they want to do new things, right? They don't want to be bothered with sunsetting old products. It's boring, right? But now might be a great time to say, listen, it's time, right? We need to do this. So you might be able to push it yourself. You might be able to actually get somebody in the marketing team to help you with that. Yes, absolutely. It is time to sunset products. Might take a little while, but that's a good investment in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point, the analogy that I can think of is icebergs. Even the cases might be very small number of trickle cases that are coming in. In order to support the product, you're probably spending a lot of time and energy that is invisible to you, like documentation, maintenance, maybe even pushing a bug fix. It's all opportunity cost. You're not serving customers who have real problems with your core product, and you're spending your time and energy on the other issues, right? So these kind of bold decisions are often forced when there are resource constraints, and that's what really shapes a company in the right direction. This is what I was saying in the beginning of the talk. These kind of decisions, any organization, any startups, actually, they make these decisions on almost on a day-to-day basis. With resource constraints, helps you to really focus on things, which really is your bread and butter, really things that can move the needle for you as an organization. So this is a great opportunity to bring this conversation up and justify it, and just say not in terms of case volume, but what is the hidden cost in supporting a product that is outdated.
Yeah, one thing I might add is that for this particular item of sunsetting, you may want to ally yourself with the engineering team because they have the same problem, right? If they're still supporting an old code line, it's really expensive for them. And if you go in together and just say, okay, we are not going to do this anymore, it's no longer a priority, you might be more successful. So good luck with that. I think now is a good time to push for ending products. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for the answer. Looks like I'm asking if anyone wants to ask questions orally, if you would raise your hand in chat, and I will unmute your mic. The last question I have through the chat session is actually from an attendee that's having a good problem. We're saying that we are growing. What tips can you provide me for hiring during a downturn?
Get a big mailbox. So you are in a perfect spot, right? If you're hiring right now, because up until 2 months ago, the main complaint I heard was, oh my God, we can't find good people. And guess what? They're now available or more available or open to your suggestions, right? So it's a good time to hire. I would say that even though it's much easier to hire today than it was 2 months ago, you still need to do all the things that you used to do to check that it's the right person. You can be a little choosy, right? You don't need to make an offer in 24 hours like you used to, or otherwise the person is going to take the other job, right? So continue to be discerning and continue to not just look at people who come to your website and send you a resume, but also continue to do active recruiting within organizations. People can feel that, maybe there's going to be salary cuts. The people who have not listened to me, don't do long-term salary cuts, right? Or people are just afraid that their jobs might be in danger and they will be more likely to listen to you. So it's a good time to hire, but don't just give up and hire the first person out the door, right? You can be a little bit more discerning. Krishna, any other ideas on that?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword to hire in this environment, because yes, you do have access to talent pool, but also you have to be cautious about who you hire, because the talent pool that might be looking for a job may not be the talent that you might be looking for. So you have to be careful. So you have to basically follow the same hiring standards that you had before. Maybe a little bit more screening that you probably need to do now, more so than before.
Yeah, and I was thinking also, we talked about remote work, right? Since you have experimented with remote work, you might also consider hiring in a more adventurous manner. And it's difficult to do, but why not, right? Maybe run a small experiment and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a great point, FT, because anyway, even if you hire, they're not going to come to the office now. So Michael, this is a great opportunity to experiment with your remote hires and see how your hiring works in other parts of the country or even other parts of the world.
And by the way, you have to figure out how to remote onboard, which I understand is quite a problem right now, because a lot of the processes assume that you can come to the office, at least at the beginning, right? To get a badge and do this and do that. And now we have to do everything remote. So good luck with that. But you have a good problem. You're the lucky one if you're hiring right now.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, thank you, Françoise and Krishna, for an engaging and informative presentation. Great discussions. I want to thank our attendees for great questions. Look for email from me pointing you to the recorded session, and also check out our website for future events. Thank you very much, and stay healthy and safe.
Thank you,
Take
guys.
care.